We left off where Agamemnon and all of the Greeks were stuck on Aulis. The winds had died, do you remember? And we have, the winds had died. Agamemnon learns that the reason the winds have died is because he's angered Artemis, the goddess. The goddess is also the protection of animals, but Artemis is also the protection of young girls, is the protector of young girls and teenage, the tween age, kind of the tween age of girls. And you remember that what happened is the winds died and they sent an oracle to figure out why that was, and that what had happened was that Agamemnon had angered Artemis in a previous time, in a previous story, and Artemis said, I'll have the winds come back again, but only if Agamemnon sacrifices the most sacred thing to him, which would be his firstborn daughter, and that was Iphigenia. And so Agamemnon agonizes over this. There's phenomenal artwork around that around the agonization of this father who knows what he needs to do. The goddess has declared it. And even though he says he doesn't want to do that, all of the other kings threaten to kill him and then go kidnap her and kill her also, because they've all amassed here. They're all waiting to go to fight in Troy so that they can then come home to their families and come home victorious. So Agamemnon has created a ruse and had his wife Clytemnestra bring this beautiful daughter Iphigenia to the island of Aulis. The ruse is that she'll be coming there to marry marry Achilles. Achilles isn't a god. He is referred to often as godlike Achilles. He's known as a powerful, young, glorious-looking warrior. And so this ruse gets set up. Achilles is not aware of the ruse, that this beautiful young girl is being told that she's now going to marry Achilles. They come to the island. Clytemnestra is there. Agamemnon, king of the Greeks, tells Clytemnestra what's about to occur, and Clytemnestra is furious. And we'll hear more about that fury later on in the next set of stories. But Iphigenia is there, and she's a 12 or 13-year-old girl. And she learns that her father is now going to sacrifice her. This is sort of a recap of just the very end of our previous session. Iphigenia learns that. She's angry about it. At first she's upset. She's begging her father, please don't do this. And then she kind of gets imbued with the spirit of the goddess, and she says, you know what? I'm going to do this. If it means the Greeks will be victorious in the end, this is the least I can do. And Clytemnestra is sobbing and trying to get her to stop, and Iphigenia says, no, that's okay. This is what I'm going to do. And she bravely marches forward to the altar, and all of the troops are watching. Many of them are in tears. Again, the artwork shows all of that. Agamemnon is bereft. And just as the sword comes down to kill this young, beautiful woman, the soldiers all look down, they hear the sword come down, and then they look back up, and the girl has been replaced by a stag. Artemis, the animal of Artemis, is the stag. So she's replaced the girl with a stag. There's another story that shows that Artemis has basically whisked the girl away so she doesn't have to experience all of the trauma that's about to befall her family. So she's been replaced by a stag. The cheers go up throughout all of the armies. Clytemnestra goes home furious. No surprise, this was her beautiful firstborn daughter. She's been tricked. She's angry. That story, again, we'll pick up later. But in the meantime, all of the heroes now are delighted. The winds pick back up, and everybody sails on to Troy. And they're sailing on to Troy, again, because they have put their word there that the sanctity of this marriage between Menelaus and Helen is something they will all fight to preserve at all costs. Okay, so the story with Helen. So we end up in this situation now where the Trojan War begins. We have all of these we've got the Greeks, and we've got all of the other cities of the region and the kingdoms of the region coming to Troy to take over Troy in order to get Helen back. So the war actually goes on for 9 years before we read anything about what's going on there. But we now know the warriors have been away from home for at least 9 years, and probably longer, given the time it took to get to Aulis. But they've been away for 9 years. The Iliad picks up in the 10th year. So the Iliad picks up, and now we're really deeply on the battlefield. We're learning much more about each of the interactions, but we know that Agamemnon is the king of the Greeks. We know his brother Menelaus is with him, and the two of them really are leading the troops through this entire battle. The battle gets really ugly. There's a great deal of death. We learn a lot about what it's like to be, what's the proper way to be a man on the battlefield in those times. That's really the wisdom that's coming forward here, is what is it like to be brave. So at another time I will tell the story of the Iliad. In fact, I'll probably do it after this one. I mean, it's really somewhat complicated. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to spin to the end of the war. So my apologies for that, but we're going to spin to the end of the Trojan War. We're at the end of the Trojan War, and now Troy has fallen. The King Priam has fallen. His wife has been taken captive. There are just all these horrible stories about the way things end. So we're at the end of that Trojan War, and now the different veterans, now the different military men go home. And different people have written different things about how they actually go home, right? We learn from a book called the Odyssey that Agamemnon goes home. He goes home with having the spoils of war be Cassandra, that's King Priam's daughter. So Cassandra is of Troy. Cassandra had been a priestess to Apollo. Apollo, the god of consciousness and awakening and intelligence. Cassandra had been a priestess to Apollo, but when Apollo approached, and Apollo's gift to her was a gift of prophecy. So Cassandra has the gift of prophecy. So Cassandra is now spoils of war of Agamemnon. Agamemnon goes to return home. He's got Cassandra with him, this beautiful young princess of Troy. Cassandra is there, and she is screaming and sobbing and tearing her hair out and screaming of what is going to happen, because she's seen everything that's going to happen. And this is where the tale, the trilogy called the Odyssey, picks up. But Agamemnon gets back. Agamemnon comes back with Cassandra. Cassandra is screaming. He comes back. There's a lighthouse with a watchman out watching for when the ships return. Clytemnestra has set this up. Clytemnestra is the queen of the Greeks, to Agamemnon being the king, but Clytemnestra is having an affair. She's having an affair with a man named Aegisthus, and they have plotted the revenge against Agamemnon for the murder of Iphigenia. It really gets pretty complicated, but just sort of as I tend to tell all of my students, be with your confusion, because it's a lot of different names coming at you kind of quickly. And I think that what we'll probably do is when we put up the course, what we'll do is also put up a list of the different names and the who's who, so you've got something that you can actually look at. In the meantime, one thing you could do is you can search online. You can search online for characters of the Odyssey, and you'll find a thing to print out that would have all of these different names and who they are. So Agamemnon comes to return home. Clytemnestra and Aegisthus have set up a watchman who says he's coming, he's coming. They roll out the red carpet. Agamemnon strolls in. Clytemnestra draws a bath for him, and they kill him in the bathtub. So Clytemnestra and so of course what Cassandra had foretold was correct. Everybody dies. Cassandra is murdered. Agamemnon is murdered. And now Clytemnestra and Aegisthus are living with this incredible stain that happens. And again, the Odyssey kind of takes that down its path. We have Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. Their son comes back and is told by Apollo, you must go and kill your mother because patricide's not acceptable. And poor Orestes says, well, neither is matricide, but he's been told by a god, you must do that. So Orestes then goes, he murders Clytemnestra, his mother, murders Aegisthus also, and then he is tormented by what he's done. And ultimately, Athena creates a jury system for him to actually find any sort of a reprieve. I mean, how do you address matricide and patricide in ancient Greek society? So again, about the confusion thing, so you've got all of these stories that kind of are interweaving with each other. So I'm happy to go to explain a little bit more of these other stories, but I'm going to really do my best to track with the Odyssey, at least for this class. So, meanwhile, back at Troy, so we have Agamemnon's gone home, we have Ajax, these are kind of some of the great heroes, Achilles, who has died at Troy, but the one we're really following now is Odysseus. So somehow the war has lasted for 10 years, and another 10 years has gone by, but Odysseus hasn't come home. So who is telling this story of Odysseus and of the Odyssey and of the Iliad is a poet bard named Homer. A lot of question about, is there a single Homer? Are there many Homers? We just don't really know that. But the one thing that scholars can totally agree on is that Homer is blind. So he's often imaged, and I'll show you one of the images, he's often imaged playing a lute or a lyre and just looking up at the sky. He will get divine inspiration from the muses. And all of the Greek epics start with, "Oh, tell me, O muse," basically inspire me to tell this incredible story of Odysseus, the warrior who came home, but somehow is lost, right? So Odysseus, all of the other warriors have gotten home. They've gone home, they've gotten home. There are different stories about the different ones who have gotten home. But somehow, 10 years later, Odysseus still hasn't been found. Nobody knows where he is. So what we're going to do now is we're going to track the story of Odysseus. So what we know of Odysseus is that he was the king of Ithaca. He's married to his beautiful wife Penelope, and they have an infant son named Telemachus. Telemachus meaning end goal, right? T-E-L-E, like a telescope, to be able to see far into the distance, or a telomere, far off away and into the future. So we have Penelope. So Penelope and Odysseus have this beautiful baby, and then Paris ends up taking Helen back to Troy. And Odysseus is called on to meet the vow that he made, that indeed he would travel, he would hold this marriage sanctified. So two representatives from the kings, from Menelaus and Agamemnon, appear with Odysseus. They come to Ithaca to tell him what's happened and to tell him that he now has to go off to war. And he behaves like he's crazy. So what he does is he's got a plow, and he hitches up two mismatched animals to the plow, one donkey, one ox. And so the plow is going all over the place, and he's trying to get it, he's just plowing crazy lines. He's clearly behaving nuts. And the two squires who have come for him believe that he is just faking it, right? They say, well, listen, we know you're not real, and you're just fooling us. And so what they do, and Penelope comes out with Telemachus in her arms. And so what they do is they grab the baby and they throw the baby down into a furrow right in front of the plow. And Odysseus pulls up short, and he absolutely won't run over the baby. And that's when they say, you're not crazy at all, right? You're not crazy. You are totally faking it. Thank you very much. Get on your military, get on your armor, get your army together. Come on, we're all going. And of course, he's been caught in his lie. He's wily. It didn't work. And so he ends up in Aulis also, and he ends up in the Trojan War. So 20 years later is where the Odyssey begins. He's been at war for 10 years, and somehow for 10 years he's basically been missing in action. So we know that Telemachus is back at home. He's 20 years old, right? So he's a young man coming of age. He's there with his mother Penelope, and Homer begins so the way Homer begins this entire story is we start off with Athena. Right? So we're going to have to leave Odysseus over here in the Trojan War and Agamemnon and all of that. And over here we're going to have to leave Telemachus and Penelope. They're there. They are in Ithaca. But what happens? There's a festival for Poseidon. Right? How did I even get to Poseidon? So Poseidon is the god of ocean. Poseidon is one of three siblings. He's one of 12 siblings, but of the three gods, we've got Zeus, who is sky It kind of becomes that he's the god of sky, but he's basically the god of the heavens, or he is considered heavens. Poseidon is the god of the ocean. He is, I said that's kind of a latter day thing that he'd be called the god of. It was that he was just ocean. And the third brother is Hades, the underworld. Again, he is now referred to as the god of the underworld, but he's just the underworld was animistic. They were understanding that the underworld was the god itself. So we have Zeus. So we have Poseidon, who is off at a festival for himself in Ethiopia, and we have the other 11 Olympians who are there, and Athena. So we have beautiful Athena. Athena is a goddess. She's the strategic goddess. Some people mistake her as the goddess of war, but that's not correct. She's actually the strategic goddess. The god of war is Ares, who's kind of like a bull in a china shop, who tends to always lose things, where Athena always wins because she's strategic. So how does Athena come to be? So we have our 12 Olympians that I just named. Zeus has mated with a beautiful woman named Metis, M-E-T-I-S, meaning thinking, thought, and logic. And when she becomes pregnant, Zeus is told by a prophet that the child of that union will be stronger than her father and will overtake the kingdom. And so Zeus swallows Metis. And he swallows her, and 9 months later gets a miserable headache, right? A totally miserable headache. And we have several different ways that this now happens of Athena's birth. But we have a lot of images where one of the other goddesses approaches Zeus with an axe, splits his head open, and out pops Athena in full dressed armor. I mean, she is clearly the product of total thought from her father's head. So because of the idea that birth, it almost looks like Zeus has impregnated himself and given birth all by himself, that process is called parthenogenesis. So you see that, we see it in science language and in genetics language too, the idea of parthenogenesis, something that self-impregnates and then is able to give birth. So Athena's name is Athena. One of the monikers for her is Athena Parthenos because of her birth story. But then, of course, anyone who's either lived in Nashville in Tennessee or been to Athens, you know that somewhere there is the Parthenon. It is dedicated, the temple of Athena. That's where its name is coming from. It's alluding back to, it's a reference back to her birth story. Okay. So, like I said, we have Poseidon, who is off at a festival for himself in Ethiopia, and Athena goes to her father and says, you know, that poor guy Odysseus, I mean, he has been trying to get home for 10 years, and we know that Poseidon's angry with him, but Poseidon's not here, and can't you just intervene? I mean, he's really trying hard to get home. He's now stuck on the island with Calypso. She continues to seduce him. He just sits and pines away for his home and for Penelope. And so Zeus acquiesces, and he says, you know, you're right. He turns to Hermes, who is the communicator god. He's also the messenger god. So he's often imaged with wings on his feet, and he's holding a messenger staff. It's kind of the beginning of the idea of don't shoot the messenger, right? The messenger goes out onto the battlefield carrying a white flag or something that makes it really clear that the messenger is not in the fight. Hermes is also, as I said, he's the communicator god. He's also the god of the slip of the tongue. So when you are talking to somebody and you say exactly what you meant, but you didn't necessarily think you meant to say it right then, that's Hermes. The other thing, his Roman name is Mercury. So he's mercurial. I mean, we see, you know, for those of us who used to play with Mercury when we were children, right? It's a shapeshifter. So Hermes, Mercury, is a trickster, right? You can't quite figure out, is he a liquid or a solid or is he a gas? Much like Mercury, the metal. But the other way that we know of his name, I mean, he's Hermes. He's also secretive. So he's the study of hermeneutics and the study, something is hermetically sealed, right? And then, of course, there's that godlike, fabulous women's clothing line of Hermes, right, that is meant to bring to mind the idea of the communicator god. So what Zeus does, Athena has convinced Zeus to go to Calypso and say, okay, it's time for you to let Odysseus go home. It's been long enough. But we still don't know any of the story of Odysseus. Nothing. So this style of storytelling is called res media, R-E-S-M-E-D-I-A. It starts in the middle. The story totally starts in the middle. It's as if I asked any of you to tell me something about the story of your life. You'd have to start where you are, right? You're going to start where you are, and then you're going to tell me probably backwards and forwards. But that way of Greek epic storytelling is called res media. You start in the middle somewhere. So that's, again, I'll just say again, just be with your confusion. Hopefully this will all make sense in the end. Or it'll begin to make sense anyway. Okay, so Zeus has Hermes go down to say to Calypso, you've got to let Odysseus go now. And you've got to help him create a raft. You've got to give him a way to just get off the island because Odysseus has nothing. Calypso argues the point with Hermes and says, I've tried to offer him everything. I've offered him immortality, and he doesn't even want that. Right? So Odysseus has come to realize after his 10 years, whatever he's gone through over the previous 10 years, he's come to realize that it's not a man's lot in life to be immortal. It's not quite right. So being on this island of Calypso, her name is where we get the word eclipse from. She's hidden. She's also one of the daughters of Atlas. So some of you may know in the center of Rockefeller Center or nearby Rockefeller Center, we've got Atlas holding up the earth, or he's actually holding up the universe. People often mistake that. There's a whole wonderful story about that too, that I'm not going to go there. But Calypso is a daughter of Atlas. So Hermes goes to Calypso, says you've got to let him go. Meantime, Athena goes down to Ithaca. So in Ithaca we have Penelope, Odysseus' wife. We have Telemachus, the young man, now he's 20 years old. And what's happened is Penelope is this beautiful woman, and she is the queen of this kingdom. And so all of these suitors are coming to try to entice her to marry them. And unfortunately, they're all behaving like pigs. So they are eating their way through all of her food, really Odysseus' kingdom. They're going through all of the livestock and going through all of the wine. And they're very dismissive of Telemachus because, of course, he's a child. Or he has been a child, and he's kind of behaved like a mother's boy up to now. He doesn't know his father. He doesn't remember anything of his father. He's heard that his father is kind of a big deal, and he's got a great reputation, but Telemachus has never learned any of that for himself. So Athena comes down, and she stands at the door of the dining hall of Odysseus' palace. And Telemachus is sitting there, and Athena has shapeshifted, and she's there as an old wise man named Mentor. There was a man named Mentor who had tutored Odysseus. And so Telemachus we don't have any indication that Telemachus knows who Mentor is. Certainly we don't know that he knows this is actually Athena. But in the way of the Greek world, hospitality is premier. So the guest-host relationship is understood to be sacred. So Mentor, this old man, somewhat disheveled, looking kind of bedraggled, is standing at the door. Telemachus sees him. The suitors are all getting drunk and feasting and just being obnoxious. Penelope is up in her room weaving. What we know of Penelope is that she's weaving a burial shroud for her father-in-law Laertes. So this is Odysseus' father who lives there, who actually has left the palace and now lives out more in a rural area, but still, of course, in Ithaca and still within the kingdom. But what Penelope is doing is she's weaving this funeral shroud by day, and every night she unweaves it. She weaves it and unweaves it, because what she's told the suitors is that when I finish this shroud, I will choose one of you to marry. So she's delaying, right? She's stalling. Meantime, Telemachus sees this old man at the door, goes and says, I am so sorry, it's such a mess here. I should be able to welcome you in with the most wonderful, lavish welcome. Please come in, sit, tell me who you are. He calls for the servants to bring the best of the meats and the wine. And this is Greek hospitality. Is they're being feted, they're being welcomed completely, fed, his feet are washed, and all of this is going on. And again, Telemachus doesn't realize that this is Athena in disguise. But we get an insight into what does it actually look like, the guest-host relationship. The host hasn't asked, who are you, what are you doing here, and what do you want? They are welcomed in, often for many days, without ever being asked, who are you? Okay, so I'm going to stop here in a minute, but I just want to leave everybody where, kind of what's happening in different places, right? So we have Poseidon, who's still in Ethiopia. That's the god of ocean, still in Ethiopia. We have Odysseus, who is still with Calypso, hidden away in the eclipse, right? Hidden away, but Hermes has told Calypso, you have to help him build a raft, give him some clothes, and send him on his way. And then we also have Athena, who's gone over to Telemachus to start to pump him up, to start to find out who he is. Okay, we're going to stop there for now.